5 p.m. Everybody, we're going to call to order the board meeting of the Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority for Harrisburg. It's Wednesday, August 25 at about 4:05 p.m. and we're going to get started. I would like to welcome everybody. We do have a quorum here, and all of the members in attendance that you see are here, with the exception of our board chair, Audrey Carter, who is attending online via the Zoom platform. And another one of our members, Mark Ryan, who is the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Treasury's appointee, is also attending. Our final member, Dan Connolly, the city's designee, is actually absent on vacation today. The first order of business is the approval of the minutes, and there are 3 sets of minutes. If it's okay with everybody, I would like to entertain a motion to approve, and it would be okay to make a motion to approve all 3 if everybody has had a chance to review. So moved. Is there a second? Seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, hearing none, minutes are approved. I would like to next invite the authority manager, Mr. Jeffrey Stonehill, to give his report on authority business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. We have sent out to you a summary of the bills paid for the period July to August, and you should have received a copy of that. We have in total paid 5 invoices. Our starting balance at the beginning of the period was $91,422.13. Our final balance at the end as of today is $85,185.81. I will mention that we did file for our year 4 funding with Department of Community Economic Development, and they received notification that they will be issuing an additional expenditure across its revenue of $100,000 in the near future. So our balance will go back up as soon as that check arrives. Thank you very much for the Commonwealth for supporting the work of this agency, and to Beverly, who was online a second ago, and her help with the Governor's Center for Local Government Management, who is our contact to DCED. We have received.
You're welcome.
There you go, very, very. We have received a total interest for the year in the amount of $11.44. Thank you to FNB Bank. That is all.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Not seeing anybody raise their hands to ask any questions. To Jeffrey, we'll move on. The next item on the agenda, I'll give a Vice Chair's report. So I just wanted to summarize the most recent reports. We've received some copies of some informative reports from the city, and I know everybody's had a chance to receive them and hopefully review them. And there's an opportunity for a little bit of board discussion. Should you have any comments or questions to discuss amongst ourselves a little bit later in the agenda. The reports that we most recently received, we received the Controller's monthly budget to actual report, and the most recent one was for the period ending July 31. We also just received the city's mid-year fiscal review, which was provided by the business administrator, Mark Woolley, and I believe that was submitted last city council meeting, which took place yesterday. And we have an opportunity again to discuss the findings of those reports. And finally, the third one I would just mention, which was you provided a copy, was it's the monthly report under the what they call the MFRA, which is the Municipalities Financial Recovery Act, I think. It's a monthly report provided to the coordinator by the city's finance department, and received a copy of that. Just overall, the reports, they demonstrate good revenue receipts for the first 6 and 7 months of the year. Solid balance in the general fund. The mid-year fiscal review, actually, they've made a note there that it did not include encumbrances, so that would be like a contract that was signed, but it had not actually been paid. The Controller's report does estimate the encumbrances in this monthly report. So, and just to give a flavor of that, the actual cash balance in the fund was reported at mid-year at $41.7 million. The budget for the city shows a year-end balance of only $13 million when all the spending priorities are fulfilled. So that'll be something for us to reconcile with that half of the year. Versus the actual $41.7 million balance, The balance that includes the estimated encumbrances was 37.8 million. So a difference of 3.9, almost $4 million difference with the including encumbrances. On the expense side, I think and there's a narrative that accompanies the mid-year fiscal report, and they mostly just demonstrated expenses that, as projected, especially on the capital project side. The big exception was personnel expenses were all well below budget, and the explanation provided by the city in the report was that there's been some difficulty filling some of the budgeted positions that remain vacant. So that explains in large part the reason why the expenditures are actually below what was approved by. And as I mentioned, that they do note that capital projects are they're all proceeding, and they do expect to expend 100% of their budget. And that means they're fulfilling the capital projects that they budgeted and set out to do for the year. In addition to those three reports, we did send a communications letter to the city and have had some outreach, all thanks to our authority manager, Mr. Stonehill. And this, the issues of concern that we're trying to stay on top of and continue to monitor. And as those were enumerated, there's the ongoing efforts to improve collections in the Neighborhood Services Fund, and that includes collection of past due amounts. The city is proceeding with implementation of new management software, especially financial management software. I believe that's an issue that came before City Council last night. The establishment of the OPEB trust, which has been discussed pretty exhaustively here at the board, various considerations, and the AMBAC negotiations, an item that appears in the city budget and that also appears in the 5-year financial plan. The Act 47 exit process, which will then lead to our mutual execution of our intergovernmental cooperation agreement. The city's 2020 audit, which will be produced hopefully on time later this year, and as the city reports, they're in the process of preparing materials and undergoing the audit process as we speak. And finally, the plan for the ARPA funding, which is the American Rescue Plan Act. That was the funding was actually included in the 5-year plan because the amount was then known right before the plan was finalized and approved by the authority. However, there was no plans for the funding other than a general statement of intent to help further the city's goals as outlined in the plan. So those are the main issues of concern that we're just in communications within the city, and I think looking ahead, I believe what we would intend is to work to obtain further communications and information from the city on these ongoing initiatives and efforts, and then ongoing, including at the next meeting, have the opportunity to review them, and then not just at the next meeting, but at future meetings between now and the end of the year. But in addition to those forward-looking items, there's just 2 issues that are outstanding, and they're outstanding from the 5-year plan correspondence that is, as I mentioned previously, approved. The one was the first of the side letters was information on a breakout for overtime expenses, and the second item was budget versus actual reports for all of the city's capital projects for the past year. So as I said, we'll work to continue to communicate and collaborate with the city on these matters, and they'll continue to appear before the authority board. So that will conclude my report. Moving on to the next agenda item is an update on the activities of the city of Harrisburg. I would like to open it up to the other members of the authority here. Traditionally, this is an area in which our fellow member, Dan Connolly, would give us a report in his absence. I thought we could see if there was any further comments from any of the board members. If I could put maybe our member Doug Hill on the spot, he could perhaps give us some enlightenment on some of the issues I know you've been working on in some of your volunteer capacities.
Sure, yes. Well, speaking with a different hat on, I'm on the board for Impact Harrisburg. Impact Harrisburg was charged under the Harrisburg Strong Plan with administering a little over $12 million that was, if you will, leftover settlement out of the incinerator transaction. And the money is to be spent half for infrastructure projects and half for economic development. We've driven most of it out. We've now sent out a request for Second, well, actually, it's the third round funding. And so hope to make awards on that here in the next couple of months. City still has probably $3 million in infrastructure funding available to it through that program. We're working with them, CRW, on how that's going to be driven out. But the other thing that we've expressed an interest in is working with the city as a third-party administrator for some of the ARPA funding. Given the staffing capacity the city has, and given the fact that we have been administering economic development grants for the last 5 years, we think we're uniquely positioned. We could give the city some assistance in that. We've made overtures to the city relative to that, but as I think we're all aware, the city's kind of slow walking its planning process for the operating negative ways rather than recognition, administrative transition, and all the rest of it. So it's going to be a little while before they're getting that's going to be spent. But we do think there's an opportunity for some other available funding for the city to drive out through those to discussions. So the bottom line is that there are quite a few projects in the pipeline. This third round that we're doing is much smaller grants. First round we were doing grants up to $500,000. Second round is $25,000. But we have well over 100 applications that we're sitting through. The other thing that we're working with the city on is a disparity study, and that has to do with processes as part of the city's procurement contracts. And, the council has pre-funded for that. We're working now on impacting the city to RFP process to get it so that consultant. We're going to take the study. That's basically review databases, both city databases as well as regional census and economic demographic databases on the types of businesses that we have there. How that's been arrayed against the city's contract process.
Thanks so much. If there's any questions, on any of those matters for Doug, I would invite anybody to ask them, and if not, I would invite any other members of the authority to provide any comments and updates on city activities that would be informative for the group, including Jeffrey.
If I can, Mr. Vice Chair. So just to let you know on two issues which have come to my attention, and they have to do with two of the issues that were mentioned in our correspondence that are ongoing issues. So these are sort of updates. The first one, I think we've already mentioned, and Doug used the phrase slow walk, and that has to do with the American Rescue Plan Act funding. There was a discussion that I was privy to between the council president and the city solicitor, where it was said that there's both a process question where the city has to adopt a process for approval of what they're going to do with the money, and then there's the actual projects that they are going to undertake with the money. The solicitor was suggesting that the legislative branch, the city council, could be involved in setting up the process, but that it would come from the executive branch, sort of the recommendation to the city council of what the grants would be, what the projects would be, what the spending would be, and that the mayor's administration is not currently in a position to make that recommendation to city council. So that's sort of in line with what Doug said about slow walking. They're just not there yet. You know, as you scan the news around the nation, you'll see that cities that have received funding, these are direct entitlement communities like the city of Harrisburg, which gets its own allocation. Those communities are in a variety of different places in the process. Some are more advanced and have already adopted a process and even started working on projects. And many others are just like the city of Harrisburg, and they haven't even gotten to step one in the implementation. So it's not that unique, but it is just an update that they have not really gotten off the square one on the ARPA. ARPA is what everybody's calling it in the world. So the ARPA funding, and there's a lot of work left to be done, because before they can say for example, we accept a proposal from Impact Harrisburg to do economic development grant, they actually have to adopt a whole plan for the use of the money, and then a variety of different projects, of which that could be one. So there's a lot of work left to be done, and of course, time is passing, and there's a question of, you're right, capacity of the organization. The city has lost a lot of key personnel, and they acknowledged that recently, and so it's trying to catch up with some of that work that needs to get done. The second update has to do, we mentioned the management software update. I think it's important to note, and I know that you were all very concerned when we talked about the 5-year plan, both this time and last time. Originally, the city had a much more conservative view of the software upgrades that would be necessary. I think I had mentioned to Ralph that I remember they were originally talking about maybe updating Pentimation, which is their financial management software. You might remember those discussions. Well, those are all out the window now. Apparently, they're going full bore, and they're talking about replacing everything, all the software of the city, which, by the way, is not, it's a very ambitious thing, but it's maybe not a bad idea, because they really were in another century. So I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing, but I think the project has morphed. And the proposal that was placed into committee last night by City Council was a project to hire a company called Tyler Technologies. Tyler is probably one of the top 3 municipal software companies in the United States. So this is a major player in municipal software. And their proposal is to basically, over the course of, I think it was 3 years, so not overnight, go through every department of the city, starting with the financials, but then going out to code enforcement and police and capital project management and personnel, and replace all the software of the city with brand new, modern 21st century software. So probably something that we would all agree was necessary. We recognized in our evaluations, the city had a lot of issues, both in communication and accounting, that were caused by their antiquated financial management system. So it's good that they're looking at that, but on the other hand, what a tremendous job that's going to be. Multi-year project of replacing everything in the city. And then Audrey asked me, does that include hardware? I didn't see hardware in the discussion, but I can't imagine it does not also include replacing servers or going to, they talked about a very large annual cost. So they might be renting cloud servers, leaving all the hardware out of the building and going everything into the cloud, which is not uncommon now. And that would sort of explain why there's such a large annual reoccurring cost, because they move all the data and all the software into the cloud, and that changes up the entire way the city is run. So just an interesting tidbit, and something that the ICA, I think, is going to ask lots of questions about in the future, just so you understand both the benefits, but also the process that this is going to send the city down the next 3 years. So those are my 2 update items on activities of the city.
Just on the technology, I'm encouraged by that news. And it will require equipment at minimum. I know when we had our prior presentation and staff, they were still running some software on AS400 systems, which is the 1970s era mini mainframe. So yeah, but I think looking at the cloud makes a lot of sense too, because given the level of security protocols that local governments need to adopt now, few of them are really able to maintain that adequately in-house, and it makes a lot of sense to look at a cloud solution to do that.
Excellent. Yes, and I would love if the opportunity came for the board to maybe meet again with the IT department in the future, and maybe get a full update on this ambitious project, so that you have sense how it's going to affect the financial management of the city, which obviously is your biggest concern. I know there was discussion, we talked about this, where the transactions don't necessarily get to the controller at the same time that they're in the finance department, and so they're working off mirror systems, and that can't be good. So I'm sure that, as well as the treasurer's office, I'm sure everything will be integrated with the new software. So very excited.
So did the committee, when they referred to the committee last night, did they give you an indication of the next committee meeting, or
No,
in case the board may want to attend the committee meeting and hear them? Because I'm assuming at some point these people are going to make a presentation.
I assume that's exactly what, it's the building committee. It's, I think that, I forgot the full name. It's building and something else, like building and housing. If that's the committee that it was referred to, I'm not exactly sure, but I guess that's where technology stuff goes for the city council. So that's where it was referred to. But you're right, they're going to have a committee meeting, and I'm sure that Tyler Technologies is going to come in and do the full presentation. It would be interesting to attend
To
if we
have
can.
somebody, at least somebody from this group.
I'd be happy to reach out to the clerk of the council, and he's very good at keeping me on what's going on in the different committees. So I'll follow up and see if we can find out when they're going to meet and discuss that, the software.
I've got a question that I'd like to throw out, and part of it is I don't know the details of the American Rescue Plan Act as well as I'm sure some other folks here do. And I don't know if this is Doug or Jeff or maybe somebody else, but I presume there's infrastructure money available. And I presume some of that goes to the city. Does any of it go to authorities, or does Capital Region Water, for example, have to go through the city to get water? Through the city, because it's been very apparent to me with the recent deluges that we've gotten, that I've seen water problems that I've not seen the entire time prior to the past year or so that I've lived in Harrisburg, and that's beginning to be a while now. And this combined sewer system, stormwater system, just really isn't cutting it, and the cost of that has got to be horrendous. So if we could use some of this money toward that, that would seem to me personally to be a good use.
And the city has undertaken several studies at pieces of or large scale replacement of the combined sewer system. It is a tremendous undertaking. So they do have some sense of the magnitude of what that would cost. As you all know, some cities have what Harrisburg has, which is a combined system where both the stormwater and the water that goes down the drain ends up in the same pipes. That is a very 19th century idea. A lot of other communities have moved in the 20th century away from that, but a city like Harrisburg has been held back by the infrastructure costs of separating into two systems, one that manages stormwater and a separate one for sanitary sewer water. The American Rescue Plan Act goes to two different levels of government. It goes to cities if they are either a direct entitlement city or a city over 250,000 people, in which case they get it, whether they're a direct entitlement or not. And then it goes to counties, and the county, so Dauphin County will get an allocation as well. The county will develop a system by which municipalities who are not direct entitlement, the smaller municipalities, can apply to the county for a share of the county's money. The city and the county both can, and just like with community development block grant, they can enter into subrecipient agreements, and they can give that money to qualified 501c3s that have eligible projects like Impact Harrisburg, or they can also give it to other governmental units such as school districts or authorities if they have eligible projects. Like all federal money, there's a lot of eligibility requirements that have to be met for a project. It's not, you can't just put together a wish list or a list of things that you want to do. It's very precise as to what you can and cannot do with the money, except for one exception to that rule, which is revenue replacement. One of the uses of the money is to replace revenue. It's a very complicated U.S. Department of Treasury formula, but if you qualify for revenue replacement in your formula, then once you have money that is going back to the municipality for revenue replacement, then there are no strings attached to it, because it's just replacing revenue that you were supposed to have, and then you can spend it on any municipal function. But if you, so you have to follow that formula. I'm assuming that the city of Harrisburg will qualify for a certain amount of revenue replacement. Audrey had had a discussion with the controller who estimates that maybe $5 million in that ballpark of the money they get might qualify as revenue replacement. And that sort of takes the strings off that portion. But the portion beyond the revenue replacement, if it's not a revenue replacement project, the other projects are very precise. Basically, it's sewer, water, stormwater, and broadband. The sewer, water, and stormwater are basically projects that are eligible for PennVest funding. If it's a project that you could have applied to PennVest for a loan or a grant, then that's an eligible project. They use what is actually the EPA revolving loan program, federal revolving loan program for water and wastewater. Well, Penvest uses those same guidelines, so it's easier just to say Penvest as opposed to federal. So if you have a project, like you were going to build, fix something at your sewer plant, that would qualify for a Penvest loan or grant. And remember, Penvest does both, but it's the same guidelines. Then it would also qualify for ARPA money. That's how it meets it. But then people say, well, can you build a park, or can you pave a street, or can you build a stadium? Well, the answer is not really. You can't. Those are not eligible projects unless you're doing revenue replacement first, and then you want to take some of the revenue you've recovered through revenue replacement and designate it for a park or a stadium or something. But it can't just be that. It has to be something that is a transformational project. That's the terminology, in a qualified census tract. So you can build a park from your revenue replacement money as long as it's a transformational park in a qualified census tract. So there are still, like everything else with the federal government, lots of rules. But you can do it through third parties too. That's the key. So for example, Impact Harrisburg can definitely be a subrecipient of money. So can Capital Area Water, Capital Region Water, and they can also, because they're a multi-municipal authority, they can also apply for Dauphin County money to the count whenever the county sets up their ARPA funding program or whatever. Now, I will say there's one use, and it's been somewhat controversial, and we should all be made aware of this. One of the eligible uses is to pay bonuses to employees. So there are municipalities in the United States that have decided to use their ARPA money to give out bonuses. That's a little controversial. And obviously, maybe it makes sense in certain circumstances, but that's a much more complicated justification for use of what is in essence one-time money that's supposed to be a transformational for your recovery from COVID. And that's the point of this money. So but eventually the city administration and the city council are going to have to come up with both a process and then projects, sort of like community development block grant, like they do every year with their CDBG money. They're going to have to come up with, that already has a process, but they have to, every year they come up with projects, and then they have a hearing, and then they fund those projects. That's sort of how ARPA works.
Another point that's just a bit different with this funding is that the funding's already been distributed.
At least half.
So it's in hand. Maybe you could comment, Jeffrey, a little bit on the timeline that the city has to make the expenditures. And then just a little side note, do I understand correctly, this lies outside the federal government's arbitrage rules? In other words, they can earn compound interest on.
There
money
is,
as it sits
yeah,
idle.
there are certain, it does sit outside arbitrage because it's not a loan. So it does sit outside arbitrage rules. It does not necessarily sit outside audit rules. So we'll have to be part of their single audit for all federal programs over a certain amount. Basically municipalities who are direct entitlement like Harrisburg are receiving two tranches, they're calling them, which is two checks. They're getting one check in 2020, which the city should have already received their 2020 allocation. They should be for half of their total allocation. They're required to segregate that money until they have a plan, which I assume they have done. Put it in a special revenue fund or some kind of other account where it's sitting to the side. There is will be a second tranche, which will be in 2022. That hasn't been decided exactly when. Next year, the federal government will decide where the second half of the money will be sent. And then they basically have 4 years or through 2026 to spend all of the money. And there is annual reporting. So there will be a 2021 report, even if they don't get to spend any of the money in this city fiscal year. They will still have to file a 2021 calendar report with the federal government saying, here's where we're at in the process, and so on. And then you have to show where how the money was spent into the different categories. Audrey believes that the money received was, or I'm not sure if that's a total that Dan Miller had said. Dan had said it was segregated, but she believes it was a $22 million number, and I'm not sure if that, I guess that was half. So we're talking about approximately $44 million, which is a very large amount of money to come up with these programs. And then you only have 4 years to spend it, which, sounds like a long time, but when you're talking about infrastructure projects, that's a lot of infrastructure projects. So the best thing to do is to get on the ball and start coming up with plans, pull out your capital plans and start coming up with projects that you can fund that are qualified and or transformational, which the city has plenty of needs. So I don't think that will be a difficult thing to come up with.
According to the city's 5-year plan, the ARPA allocation came in at 47 million.
Okay, 47. So they might not have received exactly half. Maybe they received 22 and then it's 25 next year or something. It might not be exactly half, but somewhere in that ballpark, which is terrific opportunity to really make some difference both on infrastructure and also on other things. But you can't just spend it. That's the key of my message today. Is there are definitely rules and strings, like there would be for any federal program. Interesting stuff.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Do any of the other members have any comments or updates on any activities under this agenda item for the city of Harrisburg? If not, move on to the next item. We have space here on the agenda for discussion of the mid-year fiscal report. Did everybody have it? I know we just received it 1 or 2 days ago. It all blends together now. But did everybody have a chance, or did anybody not have a chance to review it? I would like to welcome any discussion or comments on the report. I feel like I already covered my summary comments during my report earlier in the meeting, but there's time here for anybody else to comment and or pose any questions, which Jeffrey could obviously handle for us as far as the communications go between now and our next meeting.
Just a couple observations. Generally, I agree the numbers look good. I don't know how durable all of it's going to be though, because the surplus balance relies in part on a continuing set of staff vacancies that all of the key staff feel that the city's going to perform, fully perform its needed functions. And so that's something we continue to watch. I do appreciate that they've noted the parking revenues haven't returned as quickly as they had anticipated they would, but I think that the anticipation was key to the state going back to full in-person staffing. And my understanding is the state is more or less about half at this point. Not half the people coming in, but people who are entitled to come in about half time. And so that could end up being a longer term consideration for both there and the bonus payments, ground lease priority payments that are tied to parking scheme.
Comments, thank you. Of note, which I think is a great positive indicator, was they noted it on page 1 of their narrative, which was that the EIT, the earned income tax, as well as the business privilege tax revenues, they refer to it as a particularly strong performance. And on a percentage basis, it was really a wonderful positive indicator. And I think it says a lot with maybe the local business community and the small entrepreneurs and the established businesses community give themselves a little pat on the back for having revenues that justify tax returns more than anybody I believe will be collected during this year. An item that I noted that is potentially a concern is that the neighborhood services fund revenues were at 50%. 50% means that that's as of the budget. That means that there would not have been any headway in collecting the past due balances, which we know is alarmingly large. So I think I'll mention that as a special point of emphasis, Jeffrey, when you get a chance for your ongoing communications up to our next meeting. If you could ask for a little detail and dig into that a little bit, so we can find out how that it's an important initiative in the 5-year plan, and we would like to certainly know that best efforts have not been left by the wayside, despite all the other positive items and progress that's been demonstrated throughout this point.
Just a couple of things that I noted in my first pass through, because this is not easy stuff as far as I'm concerned to try to get your head around. One was the neighborhood services fund, and I didn't like what I saw there. On the plus side, however, it looked like the senator's fund was in much better shape than last year. probably because they're playing games again, and that was nice, because that was a big chunk of money. I also thought that whoever wrote it had finally gotten the message that COVID was making huge differences and reflected that in the reporting this time, and I was very happy to see that. The other thing that keeps coming to my mind, because I think it's so important that we get it set up, is that OPEB trust, as I understand it, we now have a trust set up. I heard that the board was to be appointed. I don't know whether or not it has been appointed, but it's like, okay, let's get this off ground zero and set up with a functioning board, because this is not going to get any better if we put it aside. It's not fine wine or cheese. It's going to get better with age. It's going to get worse with age. And it really needs to be set up.
The board is completely appointed by council, presumably.
No, the
No.
unions, it's a cooperative effort between the city and the labor union. So,
So it's part.
right,
Yeah.
just like you would a pension fund,
Right,
for
right,
example.
right.
But that really needs to be in place and operational because of the problems, sooner rather than later. So
I can
just.
see Jeffrey picking up on that as a point of emphasis for
Yeah.
communications. Thank you.
That's it.
Any other comments from any of the members here in the room or joining us via Zoom?
Audrey, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself, Audrey. You certainly can bring your last point to the group. They can hear you if you want to talk.
Well, and I just worry that it might not be loud enough. I'll speak as loudly as I can. It's good. I know we had asked Neil for an update on the AMBAC discussions, or sorry, the exit from Act 47. And we've not received, he has not made any progress on that, but is still trying. And then Jeffrey, now, of course, I forgot what I just chatted with you about.
The AMBAC settlement about.
Oh, the AMBAC settlement, I have been in touch with the controller's office. As you remember, Dan mentioned at the last meeting that he and the city had issues with the way the numbers were presented. And he was going to talk to Charlie about them, and he has not yet been in touch. So again, I think that's another issue, if you wouldn't mind, Jeffrey, when you speak to him, to encourage him to do that post haste, because certainly City Council will be interested in that, because that is what they indicated was a primary reason for tabling it. So I think we all will feel better if they know if we know what the issues are.
Absolutely, I will. Thank you.
Any other comments from either anybody, Audrey, or anybody else joining us on Zoom or in the room? Okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is other business. Jeffrey, do we have any other business to discuss today?
I do not believe that we did, as far as I know. I will mention, just as a matter of fact, that I did visit our virtual office, the brick and mortar video at Startup Harrisburg, and I want to thank Emily, who does a terrific job running that facility. And I would definitely recommend any small business that's looking for startup space. They really know how to do it, and she's been nothing but terrific at helping us organize our mail and providing us with, if we do need to meet with somebody, we can definitely use Startup Harrisburg. It's a great operation there on North 3rd Street.
As an administrative matter, is there any updates for those of us here regarding our in-person meetings? I understand that.
Well, the rules, I think
the
you do
various
understand.
rules are.
Yeah, I mean, things are still
Fluctuation.
in flux. I mean, it can change any time, but I think you sort of understand where they're at the moment, subject to potential future change. The board is required to meet in person. A quorum of you must meet in person, but just as Audrey is meeting remotely, once a quorum is established in person, others can, beyond the quorum, can use Zoom to log into the meeting. We're not required to make Zoom available to the public, but if we're going to make Zoom available for recording, as you can see, the setup works pretty well, and I don't have any problem if the public
you.
wants to continue to join us. It seems to be okay for everybody. And we are following the masking rules of Temple University Harrisburg, which is our host for these meetings, which has asked us all to keep our face coverings on for this meeting. But all of this is subject to whatever the future shall be, both in terms of our requirements as a Commonwealth agency or Temple University's requirements for use of their space. So I'll keep you in the loop.
Thank you, Jeff. There being no other business, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which will be public comments. And please invite members of the public to comment, please.
Sure, Eric Epstein, Rockford Capital. I guess the first question, Jeff, I have is a process. Is the solicitor on the phone?
That's the solicitor right there.
Okay, you know what? I apologize. I was still on the Jeff Engel thing. You look nothing like Jeff.
That's a positive statement.
No, it was a definite upgrade. So I guess I'm going back to the press release, which I thought you guys, the one you put on July 12th was spot on. And it doesn't seem that any of the bullet point issues you raised have been addressed. And an observation from somebody who's involved in public policy is, I think we have 4 unfilled economic positions. That concerns me greatly. It creates an artificial surplus, but it also creates challenges. I mean, it seems like we're on the verge of a movie called Waiting for Wanda. And it's a bit presumptuous anyway to think that she's going to win because there's now potential for write-in candidates. So when you talk about slow walking, we've been in free fall. We have a lack of economic staffing, and that doesn't, to me, that surplus, I'd rather not have the surplus and have those positions staffed. And let me point something else from my perspective. When you rebuild software and you look at infrastructure, you're going to need a lot of staffing. So your current budget projections for software or hardware or technicians are substantially inefficient. So whatever they're projecting is not there because you're basically are in an 8-track technology and we're moving into a much different world. We've learned that painfully. What you're also going to learn is that the people you need to staff this don't work for minimum wage. So, you know, my concern would be this, and just to raise a couple issues that I've learned from my mistakes, is that staffing is going to cost money. The service contracts cost money. This technology has built-in obsolescence. It's frustrating for me as an educator because as soon as you buy it, it's out. And one of the things they do at the Turnpike Commission, you may want to consider as an oversight body, is having the ability every year to cancel a contract. Because you're buying technology that lasts for 2 to 3 years, and sometimes the service contracts go out further. So I learned it the hard way. And as a critic of the Turnpike, I'll give them credit. I did learn from that. I guess I'm trying to reconcile the 2 terms I heard today, and that is full bore on software and slow walking economic. I don't know if you want to call it policy or strategy, but you guys had a wonderful press release on July 12th. If you look at those bullet points, none of them have been addressed. None of them. You know, the underfunding of OPEB, AMBAC has been out there for a while, so I don't really know how you exit Act 47. And I don't know what this group can do. You've identified the problems. You've amplified what needs to be done. And I got to tell you, my point, the fact that the city's not here is disappointing. And just as a member of the public who attends these meetings frequently, I have a concern that we're kind of like in neutral, and we should be a little more proactive on these issues that appear to me to be pretty substantial. The last thing I would say is that I'm still confused over what happens. Let's say you reconcile AMBAC and you exit Act 47. What is your role? When you exit Act 47, do you cease to exist? Because I'll give you guys a lot of credit. I think you provided a lot of sound direction and oversight. And I know last year there was a little tension, but it was necessary, you know, to get everybody back in their lane. What happens to the ICA once you exit?
So I could probably just quickly answer that question for you, Eric. The ICA was formed under its own legislation, Act 124 of 2018. So the existence of this independent Commonwealth agency is tied to the rules established by Act 124. And what that says is actually the clock on the demise of this body starts when the city exits Act 47. It doesn't end. It's when it begins. And it's estimated that it should take 5 years from the intergovernmental agreement being executed. That agreement is part of the Act 47 withdrawal process. At the end of the 5 year from that agreement going into effect, unless the General Assembly extends the life of this body, that's when this body will sunset. So the original thought in Act 124 was that all of that would happen sort of in the first 6 months of the existence of the ICA. There'd be an agreement, the city would go to the courts, they would get permission to leave Act 47, and the 5 year timetable would start clicking. It actually hasn't started yet because, as you heard tonight, the city hasn't effectuated leaving Act 47 yet. So the actual end of the assignment of this body hasn't been set, but it'll probably be 5 years following the exit from Act 47, unless the state, because we're a creature of the state, unless they choose otherwise.
All right, so let me just to follow up, attending these meetings, I have just two concerns. So that answered the question.
Sure.
So you exit, you have 5 years. At the end of that 5 years, your ability to have the special tariff tax, whatever you want to call it, does that go away?
No, they have amended those rules since we were formed. They have now given them permanent, semi-permanent. And I don't remember the exact dates. One is for a longer period than the other, but they've given them what we call the extraordinary taxing authority.
Yes.
That has been already granted to the city far in excess of anything that was originally done in Act 124.
So does that, I know that that was just reauthorized
It's been reauthorized for,
indefinitely.
yeah, one of them indefinitely, the
I
other.
did not know that.
We're thinking it's
The
10
EIT
years.
is indefinite, and it's a
Two-step
4-year
process
step down on the.
Okay.
on the LSTIC.
I know. And so the other question is the neighborhood services fund. I heard Ralph say something where 50%.
That's the.
And I think that's been an issue y'all have raised since the outset. What's the plan to improve it?
That is to bring the city to explain to us. That's one of the key items that we need to get from the city. But they have to tell us what their plan is.
Okay, so the dog ate my homework.
There.
I'll speak for myself on
Yes,
that one. I mean,
please do.
Thanks.
Please
I
do.
think on the NSF collections, that's one that really is really one of the ones front center for me personally as an issue, because I think it's collections is kind of one of the basic, administrative functions of an organization that deals with money. And in this case, when they have 88% collections, 12% that are uncollected are really the weight of that is being borne by taxpayers and ratepayers, who are otherwise, having unfair burden put on them. And the collections rate for other towns and municipalities is not 88%. There's information on that, including our authority manager, who in his other professional capacity does manage municipal authorities. And the collections rates are they're north of 95%. They're sometimes 96% and higher. I believe some of the issue the city describes how it arrived at this position. And in their 5-year plan, which is available in several places, including on the ICA website, they have an initiative which is to improve the collections and to collect past due amounts. Seeing the 50% number without further analysis would really just be hypothecating, but it seems that they're still collecting 88% through the first 6 months of the year. And it doesn't seem like, kind of seen as a whole, there's been progress, either improving the collection rate or as a whole collecting on past due amounts. So I think as a matter of communications, I think before we jump to any conclusions and start spitting up fireballs, I think first we want to have just some communications with the city and discuss what the real world situation is down there. When you see the staff vacancies, I think your first comment also ties into this last question of yours. Saving money is great, but unfilled budgeted positions would unduly and deleteriously affect the city's ability to execute their program requirements. Right. So they might say we have initiatives to accomplish the following things, which will make the city a better place, and then maybe save the money on the positions, but be unable to implement those initiatives. So that's kind of like hypothecating, maybe some explanation is that impacts some of the observations that you've made, that I think we make, and I think just from someone who's hearing what you're saying is in the form of a question, I think is astute, and I think it probably helps someone like Jeffrey, and certainly helps me to hear, someone else who's obviously alert following some of these topics and weighing in on them. So thank you. And I'd like to give any other questions or comments.
Just an observation, because you guys have identified threads that need to be tied together. And I don't know if you feel comfortable asking this, a lot depends on communications. It seemed to me as an observer that there has been tension between the ICA and the city over time. I'm characteristically being diplomatic. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out, is that proof? I mean, it seemed that with Dan Connolly, things got better, that there's more direct communication, but you know, for a period there, it seemed like people from the city would just bristle for requests was made. I'm trying to end this on an optimistic note. Has the communications?
I'm happy to just to give a general comment. You know, part of a team forming theory is that teams, they undergo stress, and when they're in that process, there's a buzzword they call storming,
Right.
And you butt heads, and I think it's part of it's a healthy democratic process in order to have you know, an agency the way this one is formulated, and it's here in a very specific position to assist the city in achieving fiscal recovery. And I think the results of the processes we went through last year manifest in a 5-year plan that ultimately the city writes and the authority approves annually. And then the authority would monitor the performance of the city versus the 5-year plan, and then monitor what goes as hoped for, and then maybe the variations, whether they're better or worse, communicate about them and find out what's going on in real time, especially in a dynamic environment like this one. So I think the communications, you know, and the relationship that you have with the body that we work with as closely as the city, and the city itself is a complex body with, you know, people at various levels, several people who are elected in different positions that oversee and assist one another. But we do have a really professional and actually very knowledgeable municipal financial professional who sits on our board as a member of ex officio, and that's Dan Connolly.
Right.
And I know he's not only is he very qualified as an individual, but he's actually highly experienced in specific financial matters of the city. So but I'll probably won't say more about that relationship, because that relationship I think takes place more often with Jeffrey than with me, which is once a month. But we do get little snapshots of that here, reports here at the meeting, and it seems like, you know, that communication, Jeffrey can speak for himself, but it seems to be, you know, regular, and you seem to get responses and
Yes.
collaboration.
It's been excellent.
Jeffrey,
I won't paraphrase it further than that.
it is the gold standard in this profession. I think you're fortunate to have him. I initially worked with him in Middletown. So, you know, you have a very professional person in the driver's seat, which I think is good. You work through some things. I'm sorry for confusing you with Jeff Angel,
No offense, he's younger than me.
Yeah. So, look, you know, from just as someone who comes to these meetings, what I've observed is I think you've done a good job coalescing and identifying the issues and trying to get some resolution on really complex and diplomatic challenging issues, or we wouldn't be here. So you guys do deserve a lot of credit. Audrey, can you hear that? Good bad time for the volume.
Yes, Eric, and I just fainted, but fortunately I have smelling salts.
Just bring her through when it's time to vote.
The city, I'll just observe one more, if I can be loquacious, and that the city is undergoing change. And just from my perspective, I think most of the change, some people should be really proud of. There's a lot of change just in the positive nature. You know, the change is always a little bit of a scary thing, and change involves disruption, and there's, you know, sometimes negative elements that come out of disruption. So, you know, for all of us, everyone has a role to play. And, you know, so those of us here on the board are appointed to fulfill a specific role, and obviously engaged citizenry does a lot more than just vote. And then we have members of the media who attend, and members of city staff who attend. So we all work together and work through the pain points together. I think that's the goal anyway. The best we can. City's come a long way. Has a bright future ahead of it. That's my loquacious, you know, thoughts that are inspired by your comments that are, I think, maybe questions that are couching.
No, good, but I like the role reversal. You're loquacious and I'm mute.
I get to be loquacious today.
And Eric, if I may add, on those timeframes that you were talking about before, the appointment to the ICA do not necessarily correspond to either one of the timeframes
Right.
that Jeff talked about. So some of us may or may not be here when the 5 years elapses from the time that the agreement is actually set in place because of our own terms that have been running. So it'll be interesting to see how it all sorts out.
That would be unfortunate, because that would be a disruption of institutional memory, which I think is vital. But you gotta call it.
If I could, you do know that the agreement was approved but not signed.
No, I did not.
That's where we are.
I wish I had known that when I got married. That you can agree and not sign it. Why is it signed?
I can actually read for you. One of the reports that we received, I'll just read to you what the city wrote. I think it's probably better than I can paraphrase it. The proposed revised agreement has been accepted and approved by Harrisburg City Council, the adopted ordinance. The city now intends to execute this mutually approved agreement after the Commonwealth Court issues any final administrative orders for the city's orderly exit from the Municipalities Financial Recovery Act, Act 47, administered by the Pennsylvania DCD. So a bureaucratic way of answering the question, which is that
I don't want to respond to that. I got you.
we're still in public comment. Is there anybody else in attendance who'd like to ask any questions or make any comments?
So my question is, in the mid-year report, you mentioned that the city had a existing cash balance of $41.7 million, minus encumbrances, but the city projects an in-year balance of $13 million. And I guess I'm looking for some explanation of that. I know that there's a bond payment coming up, but besides that, I'm wondering why there's such a delta between these two numbers, and if that $13 million projected at the end of the year is genuine.
The first thing to say is that the 13 million is actually not projection. That's the original budget for the year. The city right now is, for the first half of the year, as of their report, they believe that they're going to have a surplus more than what was originally budgeted. So they're suggesting that they will not end the year at 13. It'll be something in the millions of dollars more than 13. And do you want to address?
No,
the
that
rest
is correct. And if you look at the budget that was adopted, it had many more expenses, even in the first half of the year, than they've already encumbered for. So generally speaking, I think that $13 million was what they would call a conservative estimate, and they are going to have far more than that. But in reality, a lot of that is dependent not only on the debt service payment, but whether or not there's an AMBAC settlement of some kind before the end of the fiscal year, which is a very large question mark. So we're not exactly sure what the final cash balance will be for the city on December 31st, but it will definitely be healthy one way or the other.
In addition to the AMBAC settlement, which was negotiated, that would involve the city putting cash towards the settlement. There's also capital projects, of which they intend to, but have not expended 100%. The other issue is they actually collect something like 80% of their real estate tax for 6 months.
Yes.
And then the back half of the year, they're like payrolls,
Yes.
same every month. So you'll see some of that dwindle naturally as part of their business cycle.
That's correct.
So
And that's
does that
true for
address
most of it. Yeah.
Our understanding of your question.
Yeah, it does, yeah. I mean, I'm asking this question mostly to try to find out whether the city can ultimately pay off its bonds as has been proposed, or whether it should be settled down. Generally, that's the premise.
Yeah.
Mr.
I would refer you, and I'll defer to Kathy comment after this. I would actually refer you to the 5-year plan. And I believe Dan Connolly was instrumental in some of the analysis that was done there. And he actually wrote various scenarios of the AMBAC settlement and how it could take place and how much money the city would have put towards it, how much money the city potentially finance through additional borrowing in order to refinance some of that AMBAC debt. So I refer you to that. And if you would like to actually follow up and you have any further questions or comments, please feel free to pass them along or wait till next month. We can maybe have more to report in that matter once Dan gets back from vacation, and maybe once city council gets to do some further considerations of what the final plan is going to be executed. That's my loquacious comments to you so that you don't feel like you're getting short shrift.
I'm not feeling there. I can't. Become a loquaciousness and stuff.
Mr. Vice Chair, if I may address the question to our solicitor, the mid-year plan is public information, is it
It
not?
is all public.
Yes, and
Yes.
will be
And
posted
I
on the
believe it's
website.
already, did you already post it yet?
But it will.
Now it will be.
posted on the
Now that it's
website.
been discussed, it will be
Okay.
posted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, because I believe I know you well enough to know you like to read things, so it should be up shortly.
It was not already published on the city's website or
It
no?
was not published on the city's website, but it was provided, I don't know
Which
what,
is why I wanted to double
but it was
check.
provided to us by the city, and now that it's been discussed by our board, it is now a public document.
Yeah,
Okay.
We'll get it posted.
Yeah, we'll post
just wanted to double check before I suggested somebody read it.
Thank you for being here, being engaged. Anybody else in public comments? Seeing none? The last agenda item will be to adjourn. May I please have a motion?
Yes. So moved.
So moved.
Second.
I beat you to it. Seconded by Doug. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you, Audrey. The next meeting is currently scheduled to be held in Temple University on Wednesday, September 22, 4 p.m. Until then, signing out here. Thanks, everybody. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, Ralph. Bye, everyone.
Miss you.